I had a dog that wouldn't heal and a life that suited me just the way it was. That's how I'd have described things in the autumn of my 42nd year, if anyone had thought to ask, which they generally did not, because I was Callum Rice, and Callum Rice ran the Delhorn spread alone and preferred it that way. I'd been alone for 6 years by then. My wife Petra had died in the spring of my 36th, a fever that moved faster than anything I knew to fight, and I had buried her on the East Ridge where she used to take her coffee and watch the sun come up over the Castor Range. After that, I had two choices: fall apart or run the ranch harder than I ever had. I chose the ranch. The hands stayed on, the cattle numbers climbed, the fences held, and I kept myself inside a set of habits so regular a man could set a clock by them. I was up before first light, in the saddle by 6, at the ledger by 8 in the evening, and in bed with nothing but my own thoughts by 10. It wasn't a life anyone would call warm. It suited me. The dog's name was Soot. He was a 2-year-old blue heeler I'd taken on from a neighbor's failed litter, and he had enough intelligence to be genuinely difficult. He understood what I wanted from him. He simply disagreed. My head hand, a quiet man named Orville Prout, who had been with the spread since my father's time, told me plainly that Soot needed a trainer, and I needed to admit it. I told Orville to mind the cattle. Orville wrote the letter anyway. He told me afterward, and I didn't fire him, which should have told both of us something. The woman he wrote to was a Marin Holt, out of no fixed address worth printing, who apparently traveled between ranches and homesteads in the Castor and Aldrin County territories, taking on working dogs that had gotten too smart for their own good. Her fee was modest, and her references were not. Orville showed me 3 letters from cattlemen I respected, all saying roughly the same thing: that she had a gift and a manner about her that was hard to explain, and that the dog she worked became something different under her hand. What the letters did not say was what she was like to have on the property. I expected someone's aunt. A capable woman of practical middle years, plain-spoken and efficient, who would arrive, deal with Soot, collect her fee, and leave me undisturbed. I had a room prepared off the bunkhouse, a clear set of working hours, and a list of 3 things I required: that she stay out of the main house, that she take her meals with the hands, and that she not rearrange anything. She stepped off the supply wagon on a Tuesday morning in late October, wearing a coat the color of old moss and carrying a canvas bag that appeared to contain her entire life. She was not anyone's aunt. She was 36 years old, which I only learned later, with dark hair pulled back in the practical manner of a woman who had no patience for fuss, and the kind of steady, appraising eyes that made a man feel he was being evaluated quietly, and was perhaps not scoring as well as he'd hoped. She looked at the yard, at the barn, at the Rice house standing square and stone-faced at the top of the rise, and then she looked at me. "Mr. Rice," she said. "Miss Holt," I said, "welcome to the spread I've arranged." "I'll need to see the dog first," she said, "before we discuss arrangements." I was not accustomed to being interrupted. I looked at her. She looked back with an expression of complete pleasantness that somehow communicated she had not noticed interrupting me at all, or had noticed and considered it unremarkable. "He's in the south pen," I said. "Good." She set her bag down on the wagon wheel. "Show me." I showed her. I was, I confess, curious to see what would happen. Soot had sent 2 of my hands sideways in the past month, not from meanness but from sheer tactical ingenuity. He had figured out that if he moved the wrong direction with enough conviction, the man trying to correct him would spend his energy on the move rather than on Soot. It was working dog's chess, and Soot was 3 moves ahead at all times. Miss Holt went into the pen without ceremony. She did not speak to the dog immediately. She simply stood in the middle of the pen with her weight easy on her heels and let Soot decide what to make of her. He circled. She waited. After about 2 minutes of this, she crouched down, not reaching, not calling, and held still. Soot stopped circling and looked at her for a long moment. Then he walked over and put his nose against her open palm. He's not difficult, she said, standing. He's bored. I had been running cattle since I was 15 years old. I did not need a traveling woman to tell me my dog was bored. I'm aware he has a quick mind, I said. He needs work with purpose, she said. She dusted her palms on her coat. He's been given commands without context. A dog like this wants to know why. You tell him to heel and he doesn't see why healing matters, so he ignores you. She glanced over at me. I expect he has that in common with most of the people on this property. I was not a man who was easily surprised. She had managed it in under 10 minutes. I'll have Mrs. Grudge show you the room, I said. I'd prefer to see the working pasture first, she said, and I'll need to understand how he's been used with the cattle so far. I took her to the working pasture. I explained the cattle work. She listened without interrupting, which was something, and asked 2 questions that were more precise than I expected. By the time we walked back to the yard, I had a feeling in my chest I could not immediately name. Something between irritation and an unfamiliar sense that I was standing near someone who operated at a different frequency than most people I knew. I put it aside. She was here to fix the dog, that was all. The room off the bunkhouse was fine. She didn't complain about it. She didn't complain about much, which I noticed because I had been half expecting it. A woman alone on a working cattle spread in October, sleeping in a room that shared a wall with 4 hands who played cards too late. She ate with the hands as I'd requested, and I observed from the main house window one evening, which was not surveillance, only happenstance, that she was making Orville Prout laugh. Orville had not laughed in my presence in 6 years. She worked with Soot every morning from first light until the hands broke for breakfast, and again in the late afternoon in the working pasture. I watched from a distance on the 3rd day, leaning on the top rail of the far fence in the way a man will when he tells himself he's checking on something practical. She was running Soot through a pattern with the cattle, not the traditional command sequence I'd seen used on other spreads, but something more fluid, where the dog was given a direction and then released to make choices within it. When he made the wrong choice, she didn't correct him immediately. She waited, let the cattle drift where he'd pushed them wrong, and then, with some signal I couldn't read from 50 yards, she indicated the problem. Soot stood in the pasture with his ears slightly forward and appeared to be thinking. Then he corrected himself. I watched him do it again on the next run. The error and the thinking and then the correction, with no hand from her. I had never seen a dog work it through on his own without being told. I moved to the nearer fence. I told myself this was because the light was better there. "How long have you been doing this?" I asked, when she came close enough that I didn't have to raise my voice. She didn't startle, which meant she'd known I was there. "Training working dogs, since I was 19, she said. She was watching Soot, not me. My father kept a sheep station in the Aldrin foothills. I had more dogs than I knew what to do with. "What happened to the station?" "He died. My brother took it over. The dogs and I disagreed with him on several points." She said this matter-of-factly, in the same tone she might have used to describe the weather. I found I preferred to keep moving. I understood in some partial way what she was describing, a life rearranged by grief, a choice made to go rather than stay. I had made the opposite choice. I had dug in. I did not say this. "He'll be ready for cattle work in another 10 days, she said, "if you allow the training to continue the way I'm running it. If you revert to the command sequence your hands have been using, he'll be back where he started inside a week." She looked at me then, directly and without apology. "The dog is only the symptom, Mr. Rice. The problem is the approach." "I'll change the approach," I said. "I'd like to see that," she said simply, and went back to work. I stood at the fence longer than I should have. The autumn light was doing something particular to the high pasture, going gold and long across the grass, and Soot was moving through it with the herded cattle moving easily before him, and the woman standing at the center of it with her green coat and her unhurried way of existing in a space that was mine, but that she seemed entirely at home in. I went back to the house. I sat at the ledger. I wrote 3 entries and looked at none of them. By the 5th day, we had fallen into something that wasn't exactly a routine but was beginning to resemble one. She took breakfast early with the hands and was in the pasture before I was in the saddle. I made my morning ride, checked the north fence, returned by 9. On 3 of those mornings I found myself riding the long way back, which took me past the working pasture. On the 5th morning she was working Soot through a loose cattle scatter drill, the kind of situation where a lesser dog would have splintered the herd further. Soot was holding 2 breakaway steers to the east without losing the main bunch. She was standing still, 40 feet away, not intervening. The dog was doing it himself. I pulled up and watched without saying anything. After a few minutes she called Soot back and gave him a rest. She walked to the fence where I'd stopped. She had a way of moving that was unhurried without being slow, deliberate, I suppose is the word, as if every step was placed with intention and she saw no reason to apologize for taking the time. "You were right about the approach," I said. She looked up at me on the horse. "I usually am," she said, without particular pride, as if it were simply an observable fact. "That a quality you come by naturally or one you worked at," I said. The corner of her mouth moved. It was the closest thing to a smile I had seen from her, and it happened and was gone before I was sure it had occurred. "Both," she said. "You." "Worked at," I said. "I can tell," she said, and went back to Soot. I rode the fence line for another hour and did not accomplish anything useful. That evening, for reasons I did not examine at the time, I told Mrs. Grudd, who cooked for the main house 3 days a week, that if Miss Holt preferred to take supper at the house rather than the bunkhouse, the table had room. Mrs. Grudd gave me the look she had been giving me since my wife died, not pitying exactly, but watchful, as if she were keeping a record of something. "I'll let her know," Mrs. Grudd said. Miss Holt came to supper. She sat across the table from me in the chair that had been Petra's chair, which I noticed, and which caused something to shift briefly in my chest. And then she looked around the main room with the same appraising eyes she'd turned on the dog and said, "You keep this place very orderly." "I prefer order," I said. "I noticed," she said. "So does Soot. He's been using that quality of yours. He's figured out that a well-ordered handler is predictable, and a predictable handler can be negotiated with." She cut her meat with the economical precision of someone who'd eaten standing up in a lot of different kitchens. "You'll need to be less predictable." "Are you telling me I'm easy to read?" I said. She looked at me steadily. "No," she said, "I'm telling you the dog thinks so." "That's a different thing." I ate my supper. I thought about what she'd said. It was the second time in 5 days she had said something that arrived in my mind and kept moving through it after the conversation ended, lodging somewhere I hadn't expected. "The east pasture," I said after a while. "Your father's station was at flat country." "Hill country," she said. "Completely different work. The dogs had to hold a line on slopes, which changes everything." She paused. "You've never worked hill country?" "No, all flat and high plains in this territory." "It teaches you something," she said. "Things that hold on flat ground don't hold on a slope. You have to plan for the terrain you're actually in." She considered her plate. "I think that's true of more things than dog work." I didn't answer for a moment. The fire was doing what fires do in October in a stone house, building itself into the only sound in the room, steady and low. "I expect it is," I said. We sat with that for a little while in silence, and neither of us moved to end it. On the 7th day she asked me about Petra. I don't know precisely how it happened. We had taken to a habit, unplanned and unacknowledged, of covering certain ground together in the late afternoon, when the cattle work was done and the light was failing and supper was still an hour away. We had looked at the north fence damaged together. We had argued about the hay stores, she claiming I was overordering on a mistaken fear of early snow, I maintaining that the Castor Range always ran 2 weeks ahead of the county forecast. We had walked the edge of the east pasture in something comfortable that neither of us named. That evening she stopped at the top of the east ridge, where the land opened up and you could see the full roll of the Castor Range going orange and cold in the late light, and she looked at the stone marker I kept there, plain granite, small, the way Petra had wanted it, and she didn't ask exactly. She just stood beside it in the way that some people stand beside things, with a quality of attention that said they had already understood what it was and were not going to pretend otherwise. 6 years, I said. I'm sorry, she said simply. She liked this hour, I said. The light at this time of day. She used to bring coffee up here in the mornings and just stand. I stopped. I had not said that to anyone. I hadn't tried. Miss Holt was quiet for a moment. That's a good way to remember someone, she said, by what they loved. It's the only way I've managed, I said. She didn't offer anything further, and I found I was grateful for that. The people who had tried to comfort me in the years after Petra died had mostly done it with words, which were not equal to the task. She stood with me for a minute in the cold air, looking at the range going dark at its edges, and then she said, "We should go in before we lose the light completely," and we turned back toward the house. I walked beside her down the ridge and said nothing further, and the nothing further was, I thought, the most honest thing I had managed to put between myself and another person in 6 years. On the 8th day, she told me she would be finished in 4 more days. She said it plainly, at breakfast. She had been taking breakfast at the main house by then, another thing that had happened without being decided, as a practical matter of scheduling. She had a place in Aldrin County she was expected at by the 20th of the month. The work with Soot would be complete in 4 days if the weather held. She'd leave on the Saturday. I said that should be sufficient. I spent the rest of the morning on the north fence, and came back in a frame of mind that Orville Prout recognized immediately, because he gave me a wide berth and found reasons to be somewhere else. 4 days. The thing about a habit is that you don't know its weight until you pick it up and feel it in your hands. 4 days, and then the room off the bunkhouse would be empty, and the supper table would be 1 plate instead of 2, and the east pasture fence would have no one to argue with me at it, and I would have an unusually well-trained cattle dog, and precisely the life I had described to myself for 6 years as the one that suited me. I was in the south barn checking harness that didn't need checking when Miss Holt came in looking for a spare length of rope for Soot's long line work. She found it on the 3rd hook from the left, where rope was always kept on this spread, and she was heading out when she stopped. "You're brooding," she said. "I'm working," I said. "You're handling perfectly serviceable harness with the fixed expression of a man who's working something out," she said. She leaned in the doorway with the rope coiled over her shoulder and looked at me. In my experience, that means either a fence problem or a person problem. "Harness," I said. "Callum," she said. She had not used my given name before. We both knew it and neither of us mentioned it. I set down the harness. "The arrangement was for the dog," I said. "It was," she said. "And the dog work is nearly done." "It is." "And you have a place in Aldrin County," I said. "I do," she said. The barn was quiet around us. The horses were steady in their stalls, the way horses are when nothing alarming is happening and everything important is. I looked at her. She looked back at me with those steady, appraising eyes, and she was not going to make this easier. I understood that, not because she was unkind, but because she would not say a thing for someone else when it was theirs to say. "I built the habit of alone," I said. "After Petra, I built it very carefully." "I know you did," she said. "It's a functional life," I said. "It is," she agreed. "But it has," I stopped. I was not a man practiced at this. I was a man practiced at ledgers and fence lines and the kind of work that answered itself in clear terms. It's been insufficient, I said. Since you came, I've noticed. She was quiet for a moment. The rope moved slightly on her shoulder, the only motion in the barn. I've been keeping moving for 8 years, she said, because stopping somewhere felt like admitting that what I'd left behind was final. She said this in the same even way she said most things, but there was something underneath it that I recognized because I'd heard it in my own voice before, in the middle of the night 6 years ago when there was no one to hear. I'm not sure I've been correct about that. The Aldrin County job, I said. Could be written off, she said. If there were a reason. I crossed the barn floor. She stayed in the doorway, not moving back, and when I stopped in front of her, she looked up at me with an expression that was not asking me to take care of her, or to rescue her, or to be anything other than exactly what I was. She was a woman who had managed herself across 8 years of open country, and she would manage herself across 8 more if she chose to. And she was here in this doorway making no demands whatsoever, which meant the only thing keeping both of us in our separate lives was my own unwillingness to say the plain thing. There's room on this spread, I said, for someone who knows how to work hill country in flat terrain. I want to keep working, she said. The dogs. We have neighbors who need the service. You could ride out and come back. I'd want the arrangement to be real, she said. If it's an arrangement, not a convenience. I don't do things for convenience, I said. I do them because they're right. I looked at her. This is the first thing that's felt right in 6 years. I'd rather say it plainly than not say it at all. She considered me for a moment with those quiet eyes. Then she said, "All right, Callum." That was the whole of it. 2 words, said in the level tone of a woman making a clear-eyed decision, and the barn around us settled back into its ordinary sounds, horses and hay and the wind working at the south-facing planks, and I breathed for what felt like the first time since October. She wrote the letter to the Aldrin County family herself, the next morning at the kitchen table, in the handwriting of a person accustomed to conducting their own affairs. She wrote it and she sealed it and she set it with the outgoing post on the hall table, and she took her coffee out to the East Ridge in the early morning light, not to Petra's marker, but to the lower ledge, where you could see the full working spread below, the south barn and the bunkhouse and the north pasture going silver with frost. And she stood there with the cup in both hands the way a person does when they're deciding whether they mean something. I watched from the kitchen window. I did not go out because she didn't need me to. Orville Prout came in the back door for something and stopped when he saw where I was looking. He set down whatever he'd come in for and said nothing for a moment. "She's staying," he said. "She is," I said. "Good," said Orville and went back out. We had a quiet wedding in December, in the parlor of the Delhorn County Courthouse, with Orville and Mrs. Grudd as witness. Marin wore her green coat because it was the warmest thing she owned, and I gave her Petra's ring with Petra's blessing, in the way I understood Petra had left it for me, for the moment when I was ready to use it, which was not for convenience or loneliness, but for the right reason. Marin put it on her finger and looked at it for a moment and then looked at me. "That's good," she said. "Yes," I said. Soot was waiting outside the courthouse. He heeled, unprompted, when we came down the steps. Marin looked at him and looked at me. "You practiced," she said. "I practiced," I said. We went home to the rice spread in the first snow of the Castor winter, the range going white and quiet on all sides, the house with its lights on at the top of the rise the way it had been going on 30 years. Marin looked at it as we came up the track in the wagon. "It looks like it belongs to someone," she said. "It does," I said. "Now it belongs to 2. She looked at me, and her face did what it had done in the barn doorway, that expression that was not asking for anything because she did not need to ask, because what she needed she had walked into under her own power and chosen with her own mind. It was, I think, the quality I had seen in her from the beginning and had not had a name for until now. She trusted herself, and she decided in her clear and unhurried way to trust me too. There are men who would have said more at a moment like that. I am not one of them. I pulled up to the house, handed the reins to the stable boy, and offered Marin my hand down from the wagon. She took it. Her hand was cold from the drive and certain in the way her hands always were. A woman who held things with intention. A woman who set a rope coil on a hook and a cup of coffee in the morning dark, and a letter in the outgoing post with the same quiet precision. She held my hand for a moment longer than the step required. Then she went inside. I stood in the snow for a moment, in the stillness of the first winter night with the Castor Range going black and white all the way to the horizon, and I thought, Petra would have liked her, would have recognized in her something she'd recognized in me. Once, the particular stubbornness of a person who does things right or not at all. I went inside. The fire was going. Marin was already at the kitchen table with her coat on the hook and her boots by the door, the way a person arranges things in a house they mean to stay in. I sat across from her. She poured coffee without being asked. "Tomorrow," she said, "I want to look at the north pasture conditions. If you're going to work Soot in that terrain through the winter, he'll need different approaches for the frost." "I'll ride it with you," I said. "Good," she said. Outside, the snow was coming down in the steady, serious way of a Castor County winter, not ornamental, but the kind that means it. The ranch was quiet and full and working, the way a spread should be. The dog was on the mat by the door. The fire was the only sound. I had described my life in the autumn of my 42nd year as one that suited me. I had not been wrong. I had simply not yet known what the word meant, that a life can suit you and still be waiting for the thing that makes it whole. Some men learn that lesson young. I required a woman who was not anyone's aunt, a blue heeler with chess-piece intelligence, and the particular, efficient mercy of being outmatched by someone who expected nothing from me but what I actually had. It was, Marin would probably say if you asked her, sufficient. She would mean it as the highest possible praise. She'd be right.